The crow sat on the window ledge and watched her sleep. The branches of the tree behind him moaned as they rubbed together in the wind. It was a soul-shivering sound. The wind was coming from the wrong direction, and it played with his feathers. He watched as she tossed and turned, as she cried, as she shouted out. He remained unmoved. He had seen it all before. Morning was coming. The sun was a distant glow on the horizon. She would be awake soon, ready to start another day, wondering why she was so tired. The clink of the milkman sounded in the air, and the crow flew off to the tree. He found a branch that was sturdier than the others. He didn't like the rocking motion when the gusts shook the lesser branches. He watched as the milkman delivered just the 1 pint of milk to the door. The crow did not want the milk. The crow cocked his head to the side. The wind had changed direction. It was building into a northern squall, cold and bitter, far more appropriate. He saw shadows move in the house. She was up. It was her last time. She would be leaving the house at 7:25, same time every day, on the dot. Unless the car was frozen over, and then she would come out and turn the engine on at 7:15. She would leave it running while she made her final preparations for the day, safe in the knowledge that no one would steal her car. The sleepy village on the outskirts of Bristol had no crime, until now. She drove away from the house at 7:26. The crow was not concerned with where she was going, only that she would be back. He flew back to the house and perched on the back gate. It was to the side of the house, and from there he could see the street and the activities of the day. He had been waiting for a very long time. He was patient. The postman came, put a single letter through the letterbox and left. A charity canvasser knocked at the door, waited for a minute before moving on to the next house. And then the man arrived. The man had not been seen for months. He had helped her move into the little cottage with the 2 bedrooms. There had been laughing and joking, cuddles and kisses. Then there had been arguments, vicious, spiteful rows that disrupted the quiet village in the dead of the night. The crow had seen it all. The man was meant to be living here too, but he changed his mind. He kept making excuses. The last fight was when they shouted at each other in the street, all hand gestures and screaming obscenities. "Go live with her then, you deserve each other," was the last thing she said to him. And then he had stopped coming. After a while, she started saying hello to the neighbours and tending the garden. She smiled at the sparrow and fussed the cat from down the road. The man used his key to let himself into the house. The crow flew down to watch him through the window. He went into the kitchen and looked around at the country flowers curtains and the spotty kettle. It had changed since he had last been here. She had made it her home. He sat down at the little table and put his head in his hands. The crow watched him cry, unmoved. He sat there for hours, sobbing into his hands, tears dripping onto the scrubbed wood of her kitchen table that she had brought back with care and attention from the brink of extinction. The table where she sat to eat her dinner, where she made her greetings cards, and where she prepared her vegetable seeds. At 2, he got up, took a knife from the kitchen rack, and went upstairs. The crow flew up to the bedroom window, but the man did not go in there. The crow sat on the window ledge and watched the street instead. She would be home soon. The crow awaited her arrival. The crow could see her car before he could hear it, the little sewing machine runaround that she had bought on extortionate finance. The windows were closed, it was too cold for them to be open, and it muffled the sound of her radio, giving it a thumping quality. She parked up in front of the house and looked up at the crow. The crow looked back at her, but it did not meet her gaze. It was too soon for that. There was no exchange of information, just a look. She smiled at the crow and then let herself into the house. The crow returned to the kitchen window. He watched as she filled the spotty kettle and set it to boil. He watched as she opened her post. She laid the contents of the envelope on the little table, paying no attention to the dark patches on the wood where tears had fallen. She made her coffee and sat down to read her letter. She laughed out loud, and at the end she had a little cry to herself. "Thanks, Mum," she said. She folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. She put the envelope into the drawer that she kept for such correspondence. It was almost overflowing with similar envelopes, similar letters. "Right, bath then tea," she said, and went upstairs. At 5, she returned to the kitchen. She was in her lilac fluffy dressing gown and novelty rabbit slippers. Her hair was wet and tied up in a bun on the top of her head. She would wear it like that until the morning, when she would remove the hairband and her hair would have a healthy wave to it and frame her face. She filled a pot with water and put it on the stove. She lit the gas hob with the long-nosed lighter that she kept solely for that job. When it was simmering, she put bread in the toaster and added 2 eggs to the water. She never ate much in the evening, nor in the morning. Perhaps she ate well when she was out, but the crow had never observed her away from the house. She sat down to her tea and stared blankly out of the window as she ate. She watched him, but she did not see him. She was lost in her own mind, in her own thoughts. The crow wondered what she was thinking, what her last thoughts would be. He pretended to watch the street. He didn't want to make eye contact with her yet. It still wasn't time. She listened to the radio, smiling at the confessions. She rarely watched television, but she loved her radio. It was her constant companion. Sometimes she left it on all night. She washed and tidied up, as was her habit. She hated to have the kitchen in a mess, unless she was baking. She returned to the table with her card-making things. The crow had often seen her make a card on a day that her mother had written to her. He assumed she sent them in reply. She would become engrossed in the detail of the design and work away happily, creating something unique and beautiful. Today her heart was not in it, and at 7:30 she packed away her craft and went upstairs. The crow watched her get into bed. She took her glasses off and put them on the bedside table. She curled up into a ball, leaving one side of the bed empty and untouched. She never spread out in her sleep. Even when she was completely restless, she kept to her side of the bed. Minutes later, she was asleep, snoring so softly that the crow could barely hear the snuffles from his side of the window. The man came into the room. He watched her sleep. The crow could see his chest moving as he breathed slowly in and out. He was calm. He had a knife in his hand. It was the only big one she had, the one that she used for carving meat and nothing else. It glittered in the moonlight. He hung his head. She shifted in her sleep, rolling onto her back. He lifted the knife and held it in both hands. He shook his head and left the room, the knife hanging limp. The crow was confused. He was here to pick up her soul. He had been waiting for it all day. He had watched her for weeks, months. Now, at the exact time she was expected, the man had walked away. The crow flew down to the kitchen window. He landed on the ledge just as the man came through the door. The man put the knife back in the knife rack and then sat down at the kitchen table. He stared straight ahead, his hands resting in his lap. He sat so still that the crow began to wonder if he had died, but no other crows had come to collect him. At some point, the man sighed. The crow could see glistening stripes on his face where his tears had run. He watched him, fascinated. No one had ever changed their mind before on his watch, and he wasn't sure what he should do next, nor what would happen. A soul had to be collected. There was no protocol for this. With infinite care, the man stood up. He put the chair back under the table and stood with his hands resting on the back of it. The crow was on tenterhooks. But no, the man let his hands drop to his sides. In a daze, he drifted out of the kitchen, out of the front door, and out of the front gate. He walked slowly, each step taken as though it's the greatest challenge he had ever met. The crow watched him go, watched him fade into the icy night. The front door was open. The crow hopped down and stuck his head in the gap. It was dark inside the house, but the crow could see well. He saw her coat on the banister. He saw her shoes under the telephone table. He hopped inside the door. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He had never been in a house before. He always waited, for however long it took, outside. It was very quiet in the house. He could hear the gentle tick of the kitchen clock above the hob. He could hear the drip of the faulty tap on the bath. He could hear the thud of the heartbeat coming from the woman asleep in the bed above. The kitchen door was still ajar. He flew low and soundlessly into the kitchen and landed on the mantel above the hob. He scanned the room. He had to do something, but what? He could not have waited all this time for nothing. He saw the knife, but it would be too heavy to carry. There were various other instruments hung on the walls and hidden in the drawers, but there was nothing that the crow could use. He saw some matches, but decided that they were too unwieldy for claws. Then he spotted something most useful, the simple, long-nosed lighter for the gas hob. He had to do this properly. He could never be caught. It would undermine the purpose of death, of collecting souls. He struggled with the knobs, but finally managed to turn on the gas on all four hobs. He flew upstairs with the lighter clasped in his claws. Once in the bedroom, he flew around, picking up bits of material with his beak and piling it up near the door. She slept on, her eyes moving beneath her eyelids as she succumbed to her nightmares. He found clothes, cotton wool, and straw that had snuck in the window from the thatched roof. Once he had a good pile, he took the lighter to it. He held the long tube in place with one claw, while pulling on the trigger with the other. On his fourth attempt, he managed to ignite a pair of knickers. On his fifth attempt, he managed to create flames. He left the lighter where it was and flew from the room. She was stirring. He could hear her moans and grumbles as he shot down the stairs and out of the front door. Breathless and scared, he landed on a branch of the tree opposite the house. He had done it. He would collect her. Her terrified screams echoed along the street. No one could help her. She was trapped in the bedroom. It did not take long for the leaking gas caught alight too, and then the whole house exploded in a ball of frosty blue and crispy orange. Her screams stopped then, but the screams of the neighbours watching had just started. The crow flew back to the house once the fire had been doused. Her blackened remains were imprinted on the bed. Even in death, she had remained on her side. The crow flew through the broken window and started pecking at the blackened dust. If she had been a whole body, he would have pecked out her eyes, as they were the gateway to the soul. He would have stared into the empty sockets and cocked his head to the side to listen for the soul's arrival. What little was left of the charred head lifted. Now he could look at her, and she at him. Now they could see eye to eye. There was a lone sigh, as soft as sand in the sunshine, and he flew to the sky, her shadow following him. No one need know that she had not died as intended. The fact was, she had died. The crow was pleased with his efforts. Another soul collected. On to the next one.